My stepson called me a glorified secretary. He didn't know my shorthand included coordinates for black ops in denied territory. The scent of pine from the Christmas tree was thick in the air, mingling with the rich aroma of roasting turkey and cinnamon from the simmering cider. It was a smell of deliberate peace, a sensory wall built to keep the world out. For most people, it worked. For me, it was just another layer of camouflage. My name is Lorraine Patterson. I am 58 years old. And my reality was currently being defined by the slow, agonizing drip of gravy from a porcelain boat onto my mother's antique lace tablecloth, a tiny, dark stain spreading like a classified truth no one wanted to acknowledge. My husband, Robert, sat at the head of the table, his face a mask of forced holiday cheer. He was a good man, a kind man who sold insurance and believed in the fundamental decency of the world. He had married me 15 years ago, a widow with a quiet past and a steady government job. He saw a competent, organized woman who ran his home with the same quiet efficiency she ran her office. He saw reliability. He had no idea that the muscle memory in my hands, the one he mistook for typing speed, was honed by disassembling and reassembling a Sig Sauer in under 30 seconds in total darkness. He saw a secretary. He had no concept of an executive assistant at the United States Special Operations Command. To him, they were the same thing. Across from me sat Derek, Robert's son. 34 years old and marinated in a potent brine of arrogance and unearned confidence. He called himself a crypto investor, a disruptor in the financial space. He wore a watch that cost more than my car, a gleaming testament to the ephemeral value of ones and zeros. His hair was slicked back with some expensive gel that failed to mask the fact it was thinning. Beside him, his girlfriend, Tiffany, I believed her name was this month, stared into the black mirror of her phone, her thumb flicking upwards in a hypnotic, endless scroll. She hadn't made eye contact with a single person since she'd arrived. The stain grew, a tiny Rorschach test on the white linen. Derek had been holding court for the better part of an hour, his voice a grating monologue about blockchain NFTs and the inevitable collapse of legacy systems. He used words like fiat and decentralization as if they were holy scripture. Robert nodded along, pretending to understand, a placating smile fixed on his face. It was the same smile he used when a client's claim was denied. I remained silent. Silence was my tradecraft. In my world, the person who spoke the most was usually the one with the least to say, the one revealing their position without even knowing it. Derek was a transmitting beacon of insecurity, broadcasting on every frequency. I didn't need specialized equipment to read his signal. It was pathetic. He finally exhausted his supply of jargon and, seeking a new target to bolster his own fragile ego, his eyes landed on me. "So, Lorraine," he began, leaning back in his chair with a smirk that never reached his eyes. "How's the 9 to 5 treating you? Still making copies and fetching coffee for the generals?" The air in the room seemed to thin. Robert's smile tightened at the edges. "Derek, it's Christmas." "No, Dad, I'm curious," he pressed on, waving a dismissive hand. "I'm out there building the future, creating real wealth. I just can't imagine spending 40 years in the same gray cubicle pushing paper for a government pension. It's kind of sad, isn't it?" I felt the familiar coldness settle in my chest, a shield of ice forming around my heart. It wasn't anger. It was a clinical detachment, the same feeling I got when reviewing after-action reports, filled with sterile euphemisms for terrible violence. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the slight tremor in his hand as he lifted his wine glass, the way his eyes darted to his father for approval, even as he insulted me. He wasn't a shark. He was a minnow puffing itself up, desperate to look like a predator. This feeling, this dismissal, was an old companion. It had been with me for years, a constant low-grade hum beneath the surface of my life. My first husband, Frank, had understood. He was Army 1st Special Forces Group. He had seen the quiet steel in me from the beginning. We met when I was just a GS-7 clerk at Fort Bragg, processing his deployment paperwork. He saw past the typewriter and the government issue glasses. He saw the way I organized the chaos, the way I cross-referenced intelligence fragments that no one else bothered to read, finding patterns that the analysts had missed. "You don't just see the pieces, Lori," he'd told me once, his voice a low rumble against my ear. "You see the whole damn board." Frank never came home from his last rotation in Afghanistan. The official report was a vehicle rollover during a routine patrol. I was the one who processed the real report, the one that never saw the light of day. It wasn't a rollover. It was a coordinated ambush, and the intel failure that led to it was sitting on the desk of a lazy lieutenant colonel who valued his golf handicap more than the lives of his men. I compiled the data quietly, methodically. I attached the relevant signals, intelligence intercepts, and a timeline that was impossible to refute. I placed the file on the desk of a man I knew, a 3-star general who owed me a favor from a long-ago incident in Panama. The lieutenant colonel was reassigned to a supply depot in Thule, Greenland, a week later. His career was over. No one ever knew I was involved. That was my first real taste of quiet power. It was bitter, but it was potent. After Frank's death, the work became my sanctuary. The silence was my vow to him. I couldn't talk about what I did, not just because of the oaths I'd sworn and the non-disclosure agreements that could land me in a federal prison, but because the civilian world had no vocabulary for it. How do you explain to your new husband, a man who worries about quarterly insurance premiums, that you spent your day redacting the names of dead operators from a mission that officially never happened? How do you describe the metallic taste of fear that rises in your throat when you listen to a live feed of a firefight, knowing you're the one who has the extraction protocols on your screen? So I let Robert believe I was a highly efficient secretary. I let his family, especially Derek, believe I was a relic from a bygone era, a woman content with a life of quiet servitude. It was easier, it was safer. My call sign, known to only a handful of people on the planet, was Keystone, because I was the one you couldn't remove without the whole arch of an operation collapsing. But here, in this dining room, I was just Lorraine, the woman who brought a green bean casserole to Christmas dinner. "It's a steady job," I said to Derek, my voice even and low. I picked up my napkin and gently dabbed at the gravy stain. A futile gesture? Some things once spilled could never be undone. My placid response was like gasoline on his fire. He wanted a reaction. He needed to prove his dominance. "Steady?" He laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "A steady paycheck is what they give you to stop you from chasing a real dream. It's a cage. My mother," he said, his voice dropping with practiced reverence, "she was a real estate broker. She built an empire from nothing. She had vision. She created value." "What value are you creating, Lorraine? What are you building?" "A better filing system." The mention of his mother was a deliberate cruelty. She had passed away 3 years before I met Robert, and Derek kept her memory polished like a weapon, to be wielded against any perceived threat to her legacy. To him, I was the usurper, the bland, uninteresting woman who had taken his sainted mother's place. I could have told him. I could have told him about the value I created when I rerouted a compromised satellite uplink in real time, saving a SEAL team from walking into a trap in the Horn of Africa. I could have told him about the filing system I built, a cross-reference database of every known alias, safe house, and dead drop used by 3 different hostile intelligence agencies, a system that had led to the capture of a notorious arms dealer, I could have told him that the shorthand he mocked was a custom-designed encryption key, a one-time pad system that existed only in my head and in a handful of identical notebooks, one of which was currently tucked into the pocket of my apron. Instead, I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate. Your mother was a very impressive woman, Derek. Damn right she was, he snapped, his face flushed with wine and victory. She didn't settle. She didn't just take orders from a bunch of old men in uniforms. She was her own boss. You're just a glorified secretary, a functionary. Robert finally found his voice. That is enough. Apologize to Lorraine. Why? Derek shot back, his voice rising. It's the truth. She sits behind a desk all day, stamping forms. She's probably never even seen a real weapon. It's stolen valor in a way, getting all the respect of a government job without any of the risk. Stolen valor. The words landed in the center of the room and detonated. The ice in my chest cracked. Through the fissure, something hot and dark began to seep out. A memory flashed behind my eyes, unbidden. The acrid smell of burning electronics. The feel of a vibrating floor as the choppers spooled up on the tarmac outside. A young ranger, no older than my son would have been, his face pale with shock, handing me a small, blood-soaked Zippo lighter he'd pulled from his dying squad leader's pocket. Give this to his wife, he'd choked out. Tell her he was brave. I took the lighter, and for the next 20 years I carried the weight of that message and 1,000 others like it. I was the repository of last words, the keeper of secrets that would die with me. I was a functionary. I looked at Derek, at his soft hands that had never known a callus, his smug face that had never been tight with fear, his eyes that had never seen the things I saw every single day on classified screens. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt the urge to speak, the urge to dismantle him, piece by piece, with a few quiet, precise facts. But before I could form the words, a new light flooded the room. It wasn't the gentle, festive glow of a neighbor's Christmas decorations. It was a harsh, piercing white light, the kind that bleached all the color from the world. Two powerful beams cut through the darkness, sweeping across the dining room window, making the crystal glasses on the table glitter like shattered ice. The light was followed by a sound, the deep, guttural rumble of a heavy-duty engine, idling with impatient power. It was the sound of a vehicle that measured its fuel economy in gallons per mile. Derek paused mid-rant, blinking in the sudden glare. What the hell is that? Did someone order a pizza? No one laughed. The sound of the engine was joined by the crunch of heavy tires on the gravel of our driveway. The vehicle came to a stop. The engine did not cut out. An oppressive silence fell over the table, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the thumping in my own ears. Then came the knock on the door. It wasn't a knock, it was a summons. 3 raps, not with a knuckle, but with something harder, heavier. The sound was sharp, concussive, and utterly devoid of holiday cheer. It was a sound that demanded a response. Robert, startled, pushed his chair back. I'll get it. He walked to the front door, his footsteps hesitant. I didn't move. I felt a switch flip inside me, the warmth of the dining room, the smell of turkey, the sting of Derek's insults. It all faded away, replaced by a crystalline, cold focus. My breathing slowed. My senses sharpened. I was no longer Lorraine Patterson, the beleaguered stepmother. I was Keystone, and I was being activated. Robert opened the door, and the world changed. Framed in the doorway was a man who seemed to suck all the light and warmth out of the house. He was tall and broad, a silhouette of disciplined violence against the stark white headlights. He was dressed in full operational gear, multicam plate carrier over fatigues, a helmet with night vision goggles flipped up, and a short-barreled rifle held at a low, comfortable ready across his chest. The smell of cold night air, gun oil, and ozone from his electronics washed into the house, a sterile, lethal perfume that instantly overpowered the scent of cinnamon and pine. Derek's jaw went slack. Tiffany finally looked up from her phone, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something that looked disturbingly like excitement. Robert simply stood there, frozen, a man who sold homeowners insurance confronted by a reality his policies did not cover. The soldier's eyes, chips of blue ice under the brim of his helmet, scanned the room with an unnerving speed. He assessed Robert, dismissed him. He glanced at Derek and Tiffany, cataloging them as irrelevant. Then his eyes found me, and they stopped. The tension in his shoulders eased by a fraction of an inch. He had found his objective. He took one step into the house, his boots making no sound on the hardwood floor. He addressed me, and only me. His voice was a calm, professional baritone, the kind of voice used to relay terrible news with absolute clarity. Mrs. Patterson, he used the formal address. It wasn't a question, it was a confirmation. I gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Colonel Webb, I said, my own voice sounding strange and distant in the silent room. Derek's head snapped towards me, his face a canvas of disbelief. You know this guy? Colonel Webb ignored him completely, as if he were a piece of furniture. His focus remained locked on me. Ma'am, I apologize for the intrusion. We have a situation. Comms went dark on Reaper 6 40 minutes ago. They're deep in the Alborz mountain range. We've lost satellite link and all encrypted channels are dead. We think they've been hit with a sophisticated EW pulse. He spoke in a clipped, efficient rhythm. Every word was a payload of critical information. I processed it instantly. Reaper 6, a 12-man Delta team, their mission was classified above top secret. Denied territory, no official presence. If they were compromised, they would be disavowed. They were ghosts, and they were now blind and deaf. My mind was already working, picturing the terrain maps I had studied just last week, the team's planned infiltration and exfiltration routes. I knew the face of every man on that team from their personnel files. The primary and secondary communication protocols failed? I asked. My voice was sharp, cutting through the fog of confusion in the room. All failed, Webb confirmed. We can't raise them. Their emergency transponders are offline. We're dark, ma'am, completely dark. Command thinks they're lost. They're talking about writing them off. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. Writing them off. A sterile phrase for leaving 12 men to die? They're not lost, I said. It wasn't a hope. It was a statement of fact. They're following Protocol Chimera. They'll be at the tertiary fallback point in 70 minutes, but they won't have a way to authenticate the extraction signal. Webb nodded, his expression grim. That's our assessment, too. But the Chimera authentication cipher was on the bird that went down last month. The only other copy... He trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. The only other copy was with me. The room was so quiet I could hear the tiny electric hum of the Christmas lights on the tree. Robert was staring at me, his mouth slightly agape, as if seeing a stranger wearing his wife's face. Derek looked like he'd been struck by lightning. His entire worldview, his carefully constructed hierarchy of value and success, was crumbling to dust in real time. I didn't look at any of them. I met Colonel Webb's gaze. I have it. Without another word, I stood up. I calmly wiped my hands on the front of my festive snowman print apron, the one I'd bought at a church bake sale. Then I reached into the deep front pocket. My fingers closed around the familiar shape, a small 5 by 3-inch spiral-bound notebook with a plain green cover, the kind you could buy at any office supply store for 99 cents. It was filled with my looping, precise script, a chaotic jumble of letters, numbers, and symbols that would look like the rambling of a madwoman to the uninitiated. To Derek, it probably looked like a grocery list. To Colonel Webb, it was the dead man's switch, the analog key to a digital kingdom, the only thing standing between Reaper 6 and oblivion. I pulled it out, flipped it open to a page marked with a small, discreetly folded corner, page 72. I ran my finger down a column of what appeared to be gibberish. Authentication sequence is Sierra November 48 Tango Zulu Niner. Countersign is Kilo 1 Victor Echo 33 Alpha. They will have a 10-second window to respond, starting at 0200 Zulu. Tell the pilot to approach from the south below the ridgeline. There's a blind spot in the local radar coverage there. They'll be expecting it. I tore the page from the notebook, folded it once, and held it out to the colonel. He took the small piece of paper from my hand as if it were a holy relic. He tucked it safely into a pouch on his plate carrier, and then he did something that shattered the last remaining fragments of Derek's universe. Colonel Marcus Webb, a full-bird colonel in the United States Army's most elite Special Operations Unit, a man who radiated more lethal authority than anyone in that room had ever encountered, straightened to his full height. He brought his right hand up in a salute so sharp, so precise, it seemed to cut the air. His movements were a study in absolute military discipline and respect. "Ma'am," he said, his voice resonating with a deference that was utterly profound. "Thank you. You have their lives in your hands." The word hung in the air. Ma'am. Not a casual pleasantry. It was a term of formal respect, delivered from a subordinate to a superior. In that single, explosive moment, the hierarchy of the entire world had been inverted. The civilian bully and the insurance salesman faded into the background. The only two people who mattered in that room were the soldier and the woman who held the keys to his mission. "Get them home, Colonel," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Yes, ma'am," he replied. He held the salute for another second, then dropped it, turned on his heel with an economy of motion that was breathtaking, and walked out the door. He didn't close it behind him. A moment later, we heard the vehicle door slam shut. The powerful engine roared to life, and the headlights swung away, plunging the room back into the soft, inadequate glow of the Christmas tree. The sound of the truck faded into the distance, leaving behind a silence that was heavier and more complete than any I had ever known. I turned my head slowly, taking in the scene. Robert was clutching the back of a dining chair, his knuckles white. He was looking at me with 15 years of questions in his eyes. Tiffany was staring at the empty doorway, her phone completely forgotten in her lap. And Derek, he was pale, his face slick with a sheen of sweat. His smug confidence had evaporated, leaving behind a hollowed-out shell of a man. He fumbled for his phone on the table, his hands shaking. He thumbed the screen alive. On it was his crypto application. A sheer, vertical red line showed that his portfolio had just crashed, its value bleeding away into the digital ether. His world, built on noise and speculation and meaningless code, had collapsed at the exact moment my world, built on silence and duty and unbreakable code, had been revealed. It was a perfect, bitter irony. Webb's final words echoed in my mind. He hadn't said them to me, but to one of the younger soldiers who had been waiting for him by the door, just out of sight. I'd heard him, though. My hearing was still excellent. "See that?" Webb had murmured. "That's what real power looks like. They don't make 'em like you anymore." I looked down at the gravy stain on the tablecloth. It didn't seem so important now. I looked at the half-eaten plates of food, the cooling turkey, the congealing gravy, a Christmas dinner interrupted, a family fractured, a life of secrets laid bare by the harsh glare of a tactical vehicle's headlights. Derek finally looked up from his phone, his eyes filled with a terrifying new understanding. He looked at me, at the woman he had just called a glorified secretary. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. What could he possibly say? What question could he even ask? I picked up his plate, then mine. The porcelain was cool to the touch. "The turkey is getting cold," I said, and I walked into the kitchen, leaving them to drown in the silence I had cultivated for a lifetime. It was no longer just my shield. Now it was their cage,